So, this morning we're launching a new series, and I thought, I'm not going to do it. And so I've invited one of my most favourite people on the planet to come and share with us this morning. And so, my daughter's laughing at me, I'm not sure why. And so I'm really looking forward to it. You may have seen Rob here, he's preached here before as well. But why don't you just stand? Let's honour Rob as he comes to preach for us.
How are we all? We're good? You guys can sit down. You guys can escape. I think that was fantastic. That was really good. How good was it? So if you don't know me, my name is Robert. Just like Matt said, Robert, whichever one it wants to be. Rachel was trying to work that out earlier at the coffee station. But I am one of the pastors at Epicenter Church in Echuca. I am married. My wife is here. Her name is Sage. And we have three beautiful daughters. We've got Miley, Georgia, and Bobby is probably taking control of your kids' program as we speak. Is that about correct, girls? Yeah. So we are absolutely thrilled to come here this morning and to share with you guys and to be with you guys and to enjoy the service this morning. I'm pretty sure Matt is crazy inviting me over to launch a sermon series for you guys, but I appreciate it nonetheless. And so I thought best way to start would be to start with a story. And so it was about a month or two ago, so this is relatively fresh. I was sitting in the hairdressers / barbers. And as I was sitting there and I was waiting my turn because it was chaos. It's one of those barbers where not just guys go in there, but it's set up. And so that there was women in there, they were getting their hair washed and everything. And I picked the worst time ever to walk in there. And I was in there waiting for a spare seat to turn up. And there was some other people waiting there with me. And out of the corner of my eye, I could see, you could constantly see people walking along the street, going past the street. And there was this person carrying all this heap of bags and luggage and that sort of thing. I'm like, I think they're eyeballing this place out. They're carrying all this stuff. And the door, to go into this place, you got to open the door out, right? And so you can't just elbow it and push it in. You've got to open it out. And they're carrying too much to do, they've got all hands full, right? And so they're coming along, and I can see they've eyeballed it out. And so this is because I'm such a good person. This is what I started thinking. I wonder how they're going to do this. And they're getting closer to the doorway. I'm like, surely they'll put something down in order to open the door. And I'm not far from the door either, mind you. Surely they will put something down in order to open the door and then come in. But they're fumbling with trying to cradle stuff, hold stuff. I'm like, just put it down. Just put it down. And I'm having this dialogue in my head, and then there was this other guy sitting next to me, just gets straight up, opens the door, lets them in, and I thought, what is wrong with me? What is wrong with me? That I saw it playing out. I knew what they should have done, but I didn't think of what I should have done, right? And I let someone else do something, and so there's a whole lot of stuff that I'm going to share about this morning. I'm going to talk about this morning, and you guys don't know me for the most part, and I don't know you either, and so there might be a heap of stuff. In fact, maybe everything I say that you'll disagree with this morning and won't agree with. But I'm pretty sure we could all agree with this, that the most Christ-like person in that story wasn't me. The most Christ-like person in that story wasn't the pastor. It was the person that got up and actively worked to lighten someone's load, which is what you're starting. You can put up the first slide this morning. Opening a series, and I get to have the pleasure of opening this series this morning for you guys called A More Christ-Like Insert Blank. That's correct, yeah? Insert blank. And I think over the course of, I don't know how long, you're going to go through different ideas and thoughts I'm going to spitball and make stuff up, and maybe you have to touch on it. But a more Christ-like business, a more Christ-like marriage, a more Christ-like family, a more Christ-like insert blank. And so, what does it look like to be a more Christ-like what? And this morning, you can go to the next slide. The idea that I want to bring out and talk about is this, that we're talking about a more Christ-like life. A life that looks more of a representation of the God that we serve, of the God that we've just been worshiping and declaring his goodness, a more Christ-like life. And so back to the story, a more Christ-like life wasn't what I was displaying in the story. I was displaying a more self-focused life than more Christ-like, because I'm convinced of this. And so if you were just to get one thing this morning, out of everything that I talk about, touch on, share, if you get one thing, and if you're writing notes, it'd be this one thing. This is all I want you to get. And the next slide is this, that a more Christ-like life works to lighten the load rather than add to the weight. A more Christ-like life, when it sees people in life, struggling, going through dilemmas, wrestling with sin, wrestling with the challenges of what have you comes up in life, they work to lighten the load, not add to the weight. How many of you realize that what I did is that I actively added to the weight? By not doing something, by watching and musing and coming up with all the plethora of ideas that individual could have done to make opening the door for themselves easier, I added to their load, and someone else removed it. Someone else removed it. And so what I want to do this morning, I want to take you through this story, and it's from John 7. And this story is of Jesus, where he goes to the temple and he's taking part of this celebration. And so that the backstory is this, that there's this celebration taking place, and it's called the Feast of Tabernacles. And it's a celebration reminding the Jews of what God's done in the past and what he's going to do in the future. And it's this massive celebration. And the custom for them was to take part of this celebration, that everyone would travel from wherever they were to Jerusalem to celebrate. And so Jerusalem, I live in Echuca, so I kind of get this. We're a tourist town. So come summer holidays, any holidays, it feels like 90% of Australia has all congregated to Echuca. Just to get from one side of Echuca to the other is an absolute nightmare, because all of a sudden we have peak hour traffic all day. You can't get car parks. And so it'd be something similar to that. Like everyone has turned up. Everyone from all around has turned up, and they're in the midst of this week-long festival. They would have been singing and dancing and shouting, and it was an incredible, joyous thing. And so we'll pick up in John 7 from verse 37, where it says this: on the last day, the climax of the festival, Jesus stood and shouted to the crowds. And probably the important thing, or maybe just a tidbit to note, the last day of the festival, the climax, it looked like this. There was this thing in the midst of this festival called the water pouring ceremony. So for 6 days, they have been celebrating of God's goodness, of what he's done in the past to them, to their ancestors, and what God's going to do in the future. They've been celebrating. And then the climax of this is this thing called the water pouring ceremony. The water pouring ceremony was this ceremony where the priests would get some massive big jugs that were empty, and they'd go down to the well, and they'd scoop up water, walk upstairs, and then tip the water out in front of everyone. And the idea behind this was, as they were doing it, it was a representation reminding them of the blessings and the refreshing of God that had come from the season that had been, and believing that God was going to refresh them again for the season that is coming. And what would happen was, as the priests were picking up the water and then walking up the stairs, the shouts and the screams would get louder and louder. The celebration got bigger and bigger, and they would all, and traditionally they would have lyre branches or palm branches, and they'd be shaking them and make incredible noise. And historians would say the noise sounded like rain. If you were in the vicinity, it sounded like it was raining, and this would peak and peak and peak as the priests are coming up the stairs, to the point just as the water starts dribbling out, then there'll be silence. There'll be silence, because this was a moment of reverence. This was the moment of reverence of their celebration, the peak of the climax. And this is right where Jesus, the only time in this celebration that Jesus could have stood up and said in such a way that everyone could hear, says this: anyone who is thirsty, remember, they're pouring the water out. reminding everyone of the blessings of God to come, the refreshments of God to come, the refreshments of God that have been, the refreshing of God that is to come. He's like, anyone who is thirsty may come to me. Next slide. Anyone who believes in me may come and drink. And he says, for the scriptures declare this, that rivers of living water will flow from his heart. He's declaring to everyone that the thing that you are celebrating and pouring out is right here. It's me. But not only that, he takes it a step further and he's like, rivers of living water will flow from his heart, not necessarily just talking about him, but for you. And he's talking to them and he's highlighting to them. And what the point that he's trying to make to them, to all the people at this celebration, that if you are a follower, this is what should be coming out of your life. Living water should be flowing from your heart. So when people interact with you, when people come to you out of their, say, figurative desert wilderness, you should be a refreshing space. You should refresh people. You should actively work in a way that lightens the load. So with this thought, a more Christ-like life, continue to the next slide, it looks like this. It should be the most refreshing space for people. When people come into your life that are struggling, when people come into your life that are battling with sin, that are battling with depression, that are battling with anxiety, that are battling with insert whatever you want, they're going through their figurative desert, your life, your space should be the most refreshing space for people to enter. Because you should be actively engaging in trying to lighten people's loads, not add to the weight. That's a more Christ-like life. We should try to lighten the load. And you can imagine, right? Because this is what I would have pondered, and perhaps you have pondered. Jesus he's yelled at everyone. The quietness of the celebration, he stood up and he's declared this, he's yelled this out, and then the story says that he leaves. You know, no, I won't even go there. He just leaves, and it says that he goes to the Mount of Olives to pray. So he just makes this big audacious statement, like just drops this bomb of truth, so to speak, and then he's gone. So he's gone. Like no one gets to ask, what do you mean? What does this look like? And so you can imagine the gossip mill that night at the dinner table. For everyone that was there, they would have been talking with one another. Did you hear what that guy just said? That Jesus guy? Like, wasn't that Mary's son? Isn't that Mary's son? Isn't that Joseph? Did you hear what he said? I can't believe he said that. And on top of that, what does that mean? Like rivers of living water will flow out of us. Like, what does it even mean? And there's perhaps a question that you've pondered. What does it mean that if I come to him that I'll be refreshed? But on top of that, what does it mean for me that there's meant to be rivers of living water that are supposed to be flowing out of me? Well, the question for them that they're wrestling with, Jesus is about to answer the next day, because he goes, right? He goes, and then the next day he comes back. The next day he comes back, and he's about to give a practical demonstration of what it was that he just declared the day before. And so when we go to the next chapter in John chapter 8, it starts with this from verse 2. Early the next morning, Jesus has just been up the Mount of Olives. Yesterday, he just said, rivers of living water shall flow from you. They're all wondering, what does this look like? And then early the next morning, he was back again at the temple, and a crowd soon gathered, and he sat down and he starts teaching them. And they're gathering around him, right? Because they've got a lot of questions. They've got a lot of questions about the statement that was just made. They've got a lot of questions about who he is. There's a lot of questions. And so it says that as he was speaking, the teachers of the religious law and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in the act of adultery. They'd bring her, drag her to Jesus. Now realize this, potentially important to note, being caught literally in the act of adultery. She's most likely naked in front of everyone. You can't get more of a sense of shame than what is happening to her right now. She knows she's been caught in sin. That's not disputed. She knows she's been caught in sin. She knows what should happen to her. She knows her Bible. She knows her Torah. She knows what's coming. She knows it's stoning to death. You cannot get any more fear or shame coming out of a person. That's what's happening right here. And so the next slide says this. They put her in front of the crowd. And they said, "Teacher," they said to Jesus, "this woman was caught in the act of adultery. The law of Moses says to stone her. What do you say?" What do you say? And so they're probing and they're asking the question. Because they're trying to trick him and they're trying to trap him. Like, what do you say that should happen to this person? And realize this, that he is about and wanting to give this demonstration of what it looks like for rivers of living water to flow out of us. So perhaps the question to ask, if we go to the next slide, is this. Is God, when you encounter sin, when you encounter people in a sinful state, when you encounter people that are going through mess, is God more interested in restoring broken people or punishing them? What's God more interested in doing? Because there's a handful of people in this story, and we'll get to that in a minute, but their fixation and focus is on punishment. So when you engage with that family member, your sibling, your co-worker, your what, that's struggling, that's wrestling, that is quote-unquote sinning, what's God's focus? Is it on restoring or is it on punishing them? Because so often, at least, and perhaps this isn't correct for you, but what I've noted is so many Christians, our default is that we want to punish. We want to punish because we want to address insert blank sin. But the oddity or the odd thing here is that we end up pick and choosing what sins we want to focus on, we want to punish, and we want to see dealt with, and what sins we don't. Because the interesting thing with this story is, you don't know this, it takes two people to commit this act. But there's only one person here. There's only one person here. And so what the teachers of the religious law have already done, they've already chosen who deserves grace and who deserves punishment. They've already made that decision. And we do the same thing all the time. When we see sin, when we see mess in people's lives, we determine, and it generally comes down to this, based on our pet sins, what we're going to address and what we're not. And so we point our finger at insert blank, but forget about this because that's not a big deal for us. Or maybe it's because that's the sin that we're immersed in. And so what does a more Christ-like life do? It does this. It continues on. The story continues with the next slide. They were trying to trap him into saying something. That's why they asked him the question. They were trying to trap him into saying something they could use against him. But Jesus stooped down and wrote in the dust with his finger. And like church history has a plethora of different ideas on what he was writing, and it's actually got not much to do with, not much. Continue on. They kept demanding an answer, and so he stood up and he looks at them all. And imagine if you're there in the story, imagine I'm there because you're better than me. If I'm there in the story, I'm probably one of the people standing there like, yes, she's a problem. She's a problem. She needs to be dealt with. She's got insert blank going on, and this isn't good for our community. She's a problem. We need to do something about it. And then, so to Jesus, he looks at them, but he looks at me. And perhaps he's looking at you. And he's like, all right, but let the one who has never sinned throw the first stone. Let the one who has never sinned throw the first stone. And then it says this. Then he stooped down again and he wrote in the dust. When the accusers heard this, they slipped away one by one, beginning with the oldest, until only Jesus was left in the middle of the crowd with the woman. Then Jesus stood up again and said to the woman, "Where are your accusers? Didn't even one of them condemn you?" And she responds, she says, "No, they didn't." And so Jesus says, "Neither do I. Go and sin no more." There's 2 and a bit groups of people in this story. There's two and a bit groups of people, and they all have a fixation on something. Like you got the teachers of the religious law and the Pharisees. You got the crowd, and then I'll put 2 and a bit because it seems like there's just Jesus. At least according to Matthew's version of the events, he hasn't yet called his disciples. So that's why it's 2 and a bit, okay? And so it looks like this, and they've all got a deliberate fascination on something. So the teachers of the religious law and the Pharisees, they have a fixation, and their fixation was on accusing her. And so often, we're a bit the same. Maybe we're not the Pharisees or maybe we're something else, but when people come into our lives that are broken, that are hurting, that are struggling, that are wrestling, we'll fit in one of these categories. And so for them, the teachers of the religious law and the Pharisees, their fixation was on accusing her, was pointing their finger at, saying, you've done this wrong, you did insert blank, you shouldn't have done this, and you need to be dealt with. That was their fixation. But then there was the crowd. The crowd's fixation was on this. They were wanting or they were waiting to punish her. They were waiting to punish her. But then you got Jesus. And Jesus' fixation was on restoring her. Back to that question before. Is God more interested in punishing people or restoring them? Is God more interested in punishing people or restoring them? And so I get it, that anytime a message like this is preached, and perhaps even from this scripture, and it's a big, say, grace bent, the statement generally comes with this, or this is what comes back to me. But Jesus still told her to go and sin no more. Jesus still pointed out her sin. Jesus still highlighted that she was a sinner. And absolutely, he did. He did do that. But that was on the backdrop of everything else that he had done leading up to that point. That was on the backdrop of him standing in the middle, so to speak. Standing in the middle and fighting to see her restored. Standing in the middle and actively trying to see her brought back in community. This is all in the backdrop of that he makes this statement. So my thought is, when it comes to confronting people and dealing with sin and connecting with people and living a more Christ-like life that seems to, at least for so many Christians, have this fixation and focus on telling people that they're wrong. What if, with the next slide, what if we've got it all backwards? What if we've got it backwards? Connecting with people, loving people, sharing the message of Jesus with people. What if we've got it all backwards? What if, with this thought, what if we made sure that instead of just going and addressing the sin, what if we made sure that that sinful person felt completely, overwhelmingly loved first, before we drop the reality of, hey, everything you're doing is a mess? What if we engage with them, loved them, fought for them, encouraged them in such a way that everyone around you will tell you that you are soft on sin? But what if we did that in such a way that they felt completely, overwhelmingly loved first? They know without a shadow of a doubt that you are for them, that you care for them, that you are fighting for them, that you believe in them, that no matter what they go through, you're going to be standing with them. What if we did that? What if we did that? And then it's this. Then when we do talk about the tough stuff, it's coming from a place of love that they can trust. It's coming from a place of love that they can actively trust us to talk about some of these things in a way that doesn't make them feel like you're just another person telling me everything that is wrong with me. But you're a person wanting to restore me. So more Christ-like life is working towards lightening the load, not adding to the weight. So the thought is this with the next slide. It's not about ignoring the sin. It's about prioritizing the person. Jesus didn't ignore the sin. He just did it backwards to how we did it. He prioritized the person before he addressed the sin. A more Christ-like life prioritizes the person before it fixates on the sin. Are you with me? We need to be people. A more Christ-like life actively tries to do this. The next slide. More Christ-like life actively tries to lift the burden. Don't add to the burden. Be the solution. Be the solution. With the next slide is just the bottom line. A more Christ-like life works to lighten the load rather than add to the weight. So the question is, perhaps how can we do this? Or what does this perhaps look like? And to help, I want to share a story with you, something that I read years ago. Now, what does this look like in a real day-to-day, perhaps our day-to-day life? And I cannot remember where I read it from. But this story that I read was of a sex worker in Amsterdam. And that had been a profession for I don't know how long. But what ends up happening with this girl is she ends up encountering some Christians. And upon encountering Christians, she becomes a Christian herself. Like she decides that I want to give my life over to Jesus. And so she makes that decision that I'm going to follow Jesus. But the problem is she's a single mum with young kids and she's still got to put food on the table. No one's looking out for her. And the only thing that she knows how to do at that period of time is work in the same industry that she's currently working in. Not because she wants to do it. In fact, quite the opposite. She's convinced that she shouldn't be doing it. But she feels trapped because how else do I provide? And so she stays in that industry for a short period until she can escape, until she can get out, so to speak. But this is what we so often do as a church. We would turn up and tell her, you need to get out, you're wrong. And you know what? Rightly so. I'm not at all suggesting that industry is helpful nor healthy or anything like that. But realize this, when we just fixate on the problem that we see in front of us, we just add to the weight. How many of you realize that if a group of people turned up to her and say, you need to stop doing this and you just need to, like tomorrow, you can't go back to work tomorrow. You're at church today, but you cannot go back to work tomorrow. You've got to, and I get that you don't have enough money for groceries, but you can't do that. You've got to stop. You just got to stop. With no support, with no help, with no nothing, we've just added to the load. The flip side of it, if we did this, can I help you write a resume? Can I help you write your resume? Can I introduce you to some business owners that I know are looking for workers? Can I take you into my place so you don't have to worry about having to provide? Can I buy you groceries? Can we organize meals that are cooked for you? There's a plethora of ways that we can prioritize the person before we start dealing with the issue. And when we do that, when we actively work to prioritize the person, we are actively living a more Christ-like life. A more Christ-like life has this fixation on trying to lift the weight, not add to it. Not add to it. Sin's a problem. Don't get me wrong. What I'm not trying to suggest to you guys is that sin isn't a problem. Sin is a horrendous problem that destroys lives. I think Matt's comment is like sin brings death, darkness, and decrease. Is that correct? It does that. It brings that. But we should be the ones that are so refreshing that we are connecting them to the source of life, love, and increase. That'll do. I'm trying to parrot your pastor's words. We should be the ones that do that. We should be the ones that are actively trying to lighten the load. And so this is what I want you to do. I imagine that this week, in fact, I'm convinced, this week you can find someone. They may even be here. They may be the person sitting next to you. You might encounter them when you go to the supermarket after this or at lunch or what have you. Find someone this week and ask this question. Ask them this question. How can I help to lighten your load? You will see someone this week. You'll engage with someone this week and you'll see the sin that they're wrestling with, that they're struggling with. Instead of pointing it out, ask this question. How can I help? How can I support you? How can I love you? How can I make your life simpler this week? How can I engage with you? How can I serve you? Ask this question. And I get it. They're going to probably respond with, I don't know. I don't know how you can help me. I don't know how you can do that. The band can probably come up. I'm assuming that's what you do, isn't it? Yeah. They won't know because when I do this, they generally say, I don't know. I really don't know. So if they respond to that, here's some tidbits. Here's some helps. It looks like this. Be someone that listens first and solves second. I bet that person that perhaps you're thinking of, you're convinced that you know the solution to their problem. And you're probably right. You're probably right that you do know the solution to their problem. You do know what they could actively do to make their life better. You do know what they need to stop doing, but don't start from that place. Start from the place of actively trying to listen to their story because they want to know that they are loved, that they are cared for. And then from there, maybe we get the opportunity of solving the problem. Encourage more, critique less. Find something to encourage them with. Engage with them. Connect with them. Stop critiquing them. And the next thoughts are these. Show up when it matters. Show up when it matters. We have a bad habit of not showing up when it matters as people, not just church people, of people. And here's what I've discovered with showing up when it matters. It's never convenient. It's never, ever convenient. When their loved one dies, it's never a convenient moment. When their spouse has just left them, it's never a convenient moment for you. Even though perhaps in that moment you're convinced that their spouse left them for everything that they've done, it's never convenient. The problems of people never seem to turn up at a convenient moment for us to engage with them. But this is what I've also noted, is that when I show up when it matters most, it means far more than anything else. When I actively turn up and just say, hey, I want to love you, I want to support you, can I pray for you? Can I just sit here and not say anything? Show up when it matters most. Be that person that deliberately puts yourself out to put yourself in their sphere so that you can love them, so that they can feel loved by you. And then out of that, maybe you get to say something. A more Christ-like life lightens the load. Sitting with someone that's grieving helps actively lighten the load. And what was the other one? My memory's not quite good. Go back one slide. Offer grace, not pressure. More Christ-like life isn't trying to pressure them to change. It's actively just trying to love them. And I'm convinced that more life change takes shape and happens when we offer people the grace and direct them to the person of love. Because isn't that grace the same grace that was extended to you? That Jesus extended you grace even when you didn't deserve it. Let's offer people grace. A more Christ-like life, to the next slide. A more Christ-like life works to lighten the load rather than add to the weight. My question is, who pops out in your mind when you hear a message like this? Who pops out in your mind that is in your life or perhaps in your somewhat circle? That they need a more Christ-like life to enter into their life and actively lighten the load. It's not about solving all their problems. It's about actively just trying to lighten the load, not be that other individual that's just constantly adding to the weight. My closing thoughts are this. This week, you're going to have a choice. And your choice is this, because you will be confronted with someone this week. But this week, you're going to have a choice. You can point out what's wrong, or you can help make it right. We continue on. You can add to someone's burden, or you can help carry it. And the question is this: which sounds more like Jesus to you? What person sounds more like Jesus to you? And which sounds more like the church we would want to be? I know how to answer this from my church, and I'm convinced it's the same for this church because I know Matt and I know his heart. I'm convinced that his heart would be a church that actively works to lighten the load, not add to the weight. That you guys get to be a community of people, a group of people that works in such a way that lives a Christ-like life that works to lighten the load rather than add to the weight. So my encouragement is this week, as you engage with that neighbor, that family member, that friend, perhaps that person that rubs you the wrong way, look for ways to lighten the load. Look for ways on lifting the burden. Look for ways to support them, rather than looking for ways to adding to the load. How about you stand? Let me pray for you. Father, I mess this up perhaps more than others. Chiefly with that story at the start, God. I'm not perfect. I don't get this right. But Jesus, I pray that God, I pray that you open my eyes and that you open my heart, Father. I pray that you open my eyes to the people around me, Jesus. And in turn, God, that you're continually pressing on my heart that, hey, here's a thought. This is how you can actively go to lighten their load. And so, God, I want to pray on behalf of everyone here that we're individuals, we're Christians, we're Christ followers that do the same thing, that we look for opportunities to lighten people's loads. We look for opportunities to love people. We look for opportunities to help people. We look for opportunities to support people. We look for opportunities to encourage people. God, I pray that we can be individuals, and not just that, but we can be a church, God, that displays the very thing that you displayed, a God that came to lighten loads, a God that came to love, a God that came to connect, a God that came to restore, not to punish, a God that came because he wanted to lavish his love upon us. God, let us be Christians that follow that. So Jesus, I pray this morning that as we go out this week and we engage and we encounter with friends, with family members, with co-workers, with people at school, with anyone in our lives, God, that we are individuals that you're constantly encouraging and challenging us to look for ways that we can lighten the load. And Jesus, I pray that as we do that, God, I want to pray that what we witness as we start doing that and love them, Father, that it opens them up to want to have a connection with the King of Kings that we know and we're convinced of will ultimately transform their lives 180 degrees. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thanks so much, Rob. That was awesome. A more Christ-like life, hey? Who's excited for the rest of this series? We're going to go into so many awesome topics. But if something that Pastor Rob's spoken about today has really just hit you, if you have questions, if you want someone to walk with you, or you want ideas or help to help live a more Christ-like life, we would love to walk with you and to talk to you about it. So after the service, over to this side of the stage, we'll have people who are there to help you on this journey. It's good. Our service isn't finished here, however, and we have so many amazing things. We've got our cafe outside after the service, and we have some awesome things coming on in the weeks to come. We have Numurkah this afternoon. We have Christmas coming up. We've got our Christmas carols. Our Light Divines, register to that because we're going to be fully booked out. We have our Christmas Day service. And next week, we actually have our Year 6 graduation, which we're going to do. So come support our Year 6s. Let's celebrate and honour them as they move into this next stage of their life. It's going to be awesome, and we are family. So let's stand with each other for that. I think that's our announcements for this week. So let's finish on another song, and then let's go be church.